the Wuhan laboratory in China and gave us the COVID pandemic that swept the globe in 2020. Now, that's not the only such lab in the world. In fact, at last count, there were 69 of these labs with a top security rating. Even innocent work poses us danger, essentially. So you might not have to be some Soviet scientist trying to create the most lethal virus ever. You might be a scientist simply looking at augmenting the flu virus in the spirit of scientific inquiry. But if that slips out, and viruses slip out of labs all the time, then globally we have a big problem on our hands.
Tom Ough is a senior editor at UnHerd. He's also an occasional essayist, a book author, a lapsed researcher, and a gentleman podcaster. His most recent book is The Anti-Catastrophe League, The Pioneers and Visionaries on a Quest to Save the World. So, Tom Ough, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
What kind of catastrophes are worrying you, Tom?
Well, perhaps I should limit myself to those in the book. And in my defense, I tried to maintain a pretty wide scope, and I was looking principally at things that might kill a lot of us or things that might kill all of us. So I hope those qualifies catastrophes in your eyes.
These are called extinction level events, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that is one term for them. Yes, so there are catastrophic risks and there are existential risks, and the latter of those might imperil our entire existence as a species.
So what kind of catastrophes have you got in mind?
Asteroids are a classic, and it's asteroids that did for some of our predecessors on this planet, namely the dinosaurs. The asteroids fall into a category that we call the natural risks. So they come from the natural world. They also include supervolcanoes and solar storms. And those are the ones that actually I feel relatively confident that we're safe from in the foreseeable future. Now, there's another bucket of risks, and those are the anthropogenic risks, or those that are man-made. And those include things like pandemics that we have made ourselves, and COVID might well be an example of a modified virus that slipped out of a laboratory. It also includes artificial intelligence, and the threat from AI could take many forms, but safe to say, over the next decades, we'll be introducing some powerful forces to the world. And all of those, I think, together give some researchers some sleepless nights.
Do any particular catastrophes give you a sleepless night?
Well, I've certainly in the course of my research and my writing of the book, I've had what you might call some dark tea times of the soul when I've spoken to people who work on things like AI safety. And a lot of them are very worried that there might be some kind of takeover scenario in our medium-term future, which would render us sidelined or extinct. And of course, some of that rubs off on you, the interviewer, when you were speaking to someone who works on those things. While some of the worries about AI certainly feel abstract and definitely are not the kind of worry that our brains are designed for. It's difficult for us to foresee how it will happen. It's difficult for us to even forecast exactly what will happen. So while that can feel somewhat abstract, even when I started using LLMs like ChatGPT when they first came out, it was apparent to me that my line of work as a journalist was in some ways threatened. And I think those sort of near-term risks, which are nothing to do with extinction, are probably a realer source of worry in most people's lives, perhaps even mine, than are the abstract fears of extinction.
What would we do in our society if 10% of people were made unemployed. Well, that would be a bit of a catastrophe. But what about 99.9% of people being made unemployed? That's the kind of breakdown of society as a whole, if that happens. And it comes at you in a rather strange way. Did any of your conversations come up with that kind of view?
I don't doubt that there'll be years and years of great unrest. I think that's actually um, pretty likely. All you have to do is like slightly extrapolate the progress of robotics at the moment, adds to that progress in AI, and it might take a few scientific leaps, but it's easy to imagine that just as some lines of work are already being outmoded by AI, so will many more in our lifetimes. And we are simply unprepared as a society to deal with those problems. So I think, people are right to worry about this.
I think the real frightening thing that came over from Eric Schmidt was that his time scale for this was not 100 years, it was 5 years. It was like, this is going to happen very, very soon. He reckoned that they wouldn't need any programmers in Google in a year or two's time. No programmers at all, because it'd all be done by AI. And then after
Well,
that, there were people who were editors like yourself and journalists like yourself. I've tried using AI to help me write some copy. And what I was really shocked at was I wrote something myself and I said, okay, I think this is quite good. Okay. I put it through ChatGPT and I said, can you improve on this? Can you make it stylistically better? Can you make it more professional? Can you give it a bit more edge to it? And what I got back was better than what I'd written myself. And I was to say I was upset was one way of approaching it, but it's kind of shocking as well in a way.
yes, but you've got on your side uh, a long career with all kinds of implicit knowledge that an LLM can't pick up from the internet, and I suspect that this is also a kind of we can think of it in terms of sprint speed. So the LLM might even be better than you over short distances, but over long distances, you will write something that is more coherent than an LLM because it just falls down over longer distances. So set that challenge on a kind of chapter length task, and I think that you will beat it hands down, at least for now.
But now that's the difficulty,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, that is the worrying
But
thing. Yeah.
now, but next year, who's to say? It's not been that long ago since the greatest chess champion in the world was easily beaten by Deep Blue and now Go, the Chinese game of Go, is now superseded by AI of some kind. Can we switch the catastrophe about, because I want to go back to something you said earlier on, which is the present threat of extraterrestrial impacts and collisions, because I know we've had a number of movies made about it. Meteor, Deep Impact, all kinds of things produce this kind of scenario. Is that something that worries you at all? You said you thought that wouldn't be the end of the world in the same sense that these other ones would be.
Yeah, I feel like I can offer some reassurance to your viewers, Philip, that they need not toss and turn in their beds at night worrying about asteroids, because as you might know, in 2022 we successfully demonstrated that we can deflect an asteroid, and there are certainly bigger asteroids out there than Dimorphos, which is the one that we kind of sent off its original trajectory,
Remind
but
me, how did we do that? What did we do for
um,
to?
okay, so I think NASA over the years have mooted several different ways of deflecting an asteroid. I think one was sort of focusing light at it and burning off a bit of regolith, which is the kind of dust on its surface, and like causing and that kind of incineration would slightly push it out of its original arc. Another method would have been because these are Americans, so they were thinking of nuking it. But but in the end, they came up with something simpler, which is
Rather like
simply
one of those Hollywood movies we were talking about.
yeah. I think one of them actually does involve a nuke and an asteroid. But
Yeah.
it turns out that it can be a lot simpler. And all you need to do is pilot a small spacecraft into the asteroid, hit it kind of slap bang like that, and that will knock it slightly. And that's more than enough given the kind of distances that they're traveling. So that's what they did. and it
Well, that
worked.
depends upon how big the asteroid is, though, isn't it? I was looking up specifically for this particular talk, that there is an asteroid hurtling towards us called Apophis. It's due to hit us, or not hit us, pass us by, says NASA, in 2029. It's the size of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, apparently. It's a massive thing, but it would produce 100,000 tons of, or 100,000 Hiroshimas or something if it actually hit us. And I was looking at how close is it going to get, and they said it was going to get 20,000 miles away. And I thought, goodness me, that's incredibly close. 20,000 miles. The moon is 250,000 miles away. So it's well within the scope of the moon. And yet we're told that we shouldn't worry about that. And you're saying we shouldn't worry about things like that either. You think we can cope with it?
20,000 miles does seem mighty close to me, actually.
Yeah, and what's more, they're not going to be that sure until 2027, because 2027 is when it gets close enough for them to make sharper measurements. But 2029 is when they're expecting its first come round. But anyway, what about the problem of extraterrestrial alien artifacts? Now, I was talking with Avi Loeb, who's professor on cosmology, quite recently, and he said there's an object hurtling towards us at the moment called 3I Atlas, which is an unusual kind of comet. It's going to be reaching us around about October of this year. And it's going to swing, but it's not going to hit us at all. That's quite certain about that. But the point he was making was this. He said he has estimated, from the very strange appearance of this object and some anomalies about it, that there is a probability that it's not a natural object. And I asked him what that probability was, and he told me it was 40% probable that it was an alien artifact, as far as we can tell at the moment. Don't know what you make of that kind of catastrophe.
Well, I think this kind of thing has happened before, where some kind of phenomenon in the solar system has looked unusual to us, and typically it turns out that it is something normal, or it's some emission from a quasar, or it's a sort of funny shaped asteroid or something. I certainly wouldn't want to discount the possibility that there's alien life out there, um, but I think, given the kind of timescales that the life might exist on, they're probably going to be either very primitive microbes or something far more advanced than we can possibly imagine. So the kind of little green men scenario kind of relies on the assumption that the aliens, excitingly, are like recognizably kind of at a stage of kind of civilizational improvement, not unrecognizable to our own, but slightly more advanced. Whereas the odds of our finding them at that kind of moment in their history is so slim.
You talk in your book about a mathematical factor called P doom, or the probability of a particular event leading to doom or to extinction level events. What would be your P doom evaluation then for extraterrestrial comets, asteroids, or other alien artifacts? What percentage or probability would you put on that?
As a kind of percentage chance of some sort of alien doom being inflicted on us in the next century, I put it, a long way below 1%.
Very low.
But I think if alien doom were to arrive, it would be instant. There would be no struggle. It would just be over like that. So at least I
You
don't
don't
think it
even
would be
know
a kind of
about it.
a bloody war. Yeah, we wouldn't know anything about it. It would just be over.
Okay, when I was growing up, and I was more your age than I am my age, in fact, younger than that, growing up in the 60s, there was a constant doom-mongering threat of almost instant
Well,
annihilation from
nuclear war,
nuclear
right?
war. Nuclear
Um,
war, yeah. How real is the danger of nuclear war now?
my father is old enough to remember kind of taxiing nuclear bombers at the airbase near where he grew up, and I think that does put into perspective some of the stuff that I write about that is quite abstract. There is, in fact, this period of British history, which you remember, where the threat of annihilation was far more tangible in some ways than it is now. I mean, how did you guys make it through the day?
We had adverts on the television which told us what to do in case there was a big nuclear explosion 50 miles down the road in a big mushroom cloud, and then they said, go and hide in your kitchen or something, and close all the windows and don't let any air in
And
because there might
don't look
be
out of the
weapons.
window.
And, and don't go outside for 3 weeks. So hopefully you've got enough food in the store. But fortunately, we didn't have to do any of that. So we did manage to survive it. But what's your estimate of that at the moment? At the moment, you've got nuclear weapons, which Russia's got, China's got. China was doing a parade of them quite recently. Russia's got a Satan II missile, which I'm told is so vastly bigger than anything Hiroshima saw. Just one of them would kill off half the people in this country. Um, are we right to be worried about that on a daily basis, or should we just go to bed as normal and forget about it?
Oh, I think it is absolutely right that some people in society, I do. I'll start with a different thought, which is this: I don't think it does any good for most people to worry about these things, because there's very little we can do to to kind of affect the system of incentives that have resulted in the creation of these weapons.
That's the stoic view, though, isn't it? That's not the
Yes,
view that there
yes,
isn't any
and that's
danger. It's just there's nothing we can do about it.
yes, and so it's not my full answer. I also think that the risk of nuclear war, though low year to year, researchers would put it, kind of forecasters whose job it is to kind of put numbers on these kind of difficult, nebulous risks, put the risk of might be something like the risk of an exchange is at 1% per year, and that is unacceptably high. That is
Mm.
far too high given how much suffering that would entail. And so as a society, yes, we should absolutely be worried about this. I mean, there are so many. There's so much one could say about the threat of nuclear war. I think it is important to remember that things are much less bad than at certain periods in the Cold War. So the number of warheads is a fraction of what it was. Um, there is not the. I mean, it's very hard to know what goes on in nuclear arsenals. I suspect that they're not quite on the hair trigger readiness that they have been in the past. Another thing to bear in mind that can give us some hope is that it's very difficult to maintain a nuclear arsenal where all the warheads are ready to fire perfectly. Like this is actually a very difficult engineering feat, um, and it's often the case that tests fail. So even if there were to be a sort of hostile launch, perhaps not all the warheads would hit their targets. Perhaps one would fail. We just don't know. What I'm not saying is that we should be relying on some kind of systems failure like that. It seems like it seems like a massive, like a huge priority for the West to get into trilateral negotiations with Russia and China, and to reintroduce mutual inspections of each other's weapon sites and so on. Um, that seems to me to be the only pragmatic way of reducing the threat. It's not going
We
to
seem to
be
be
kind
in
of
a, so we seem to be in an opposite situation to that, though, at the moment, don't we? I think things are just
well.
es-
I don't know. I think we're in. I think we might be
Ukraine.
in a. Yes, so there were specific threats made to London at the outset of the war, and I understand that those in the Pentagon thought. I think this is public knowledge now, but I think that at the time when those threats were being made, the internal view of the Pentagon was that there was a 50-50 chance of a tactical nuclear weapon being used in Ukraine.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a high percentage,
it
50%.
Yes, it is unacceptably high, as I say.
Is that there's a threat here, not just from the superpowers themselves, but there's stockpiling of various materials like uranium-235 in various places, which can be sold to other actors who, if they wish to make their own nuclear bombs, terrorists, for example, who could make dirty bombs, all that kind of stuff is also in the background, isn't it? And maybe even a greater danger than Russia sending some missiles over.
Well, it certainly was when the USSR imploded. And that's what I write about in the introduction to the
Yeah.
book. I write about an American diplomat who is sent to Kazakhstan, and then the USSR is falling apart around him, and he receives words that there are kind of stocks of uranium and warehouses of biological weapons that are hardly supervised. Maybe there's a kind of very janky little lock or something, and local businessmen know where the stuff is, and they're kind of being sniffed around by the Iranians or the North Koreans. So, as far as I know, we're not in that kind of situation now, where there's some kind of failing superpower or smaller country with discarded bits of uranium across the world. I think we're pretty good globally at ensuring these materials are, well, ensuring that they're kept track. They might not all be where we want them to be, but we roughly know where all the stuff is. I think that's probably the situation now. Although if the stuff kind of were loose, I doubt it would be public knowledge.
Tell me something about biological weapons, because they're not just busy making nuclear bombs, they're also working very hard on other kinds of more insidious weapons, which you talk about in your book as well.
Yeah. There have been several times in human history where we've combatants in war might try, for instance, to kind of hurl diseased heads over the fortifications of a town that they're besieging. So it's not new that we might try to make ourselves sick or make each other sick. And although this doesn't really happen in war much, because you can't really, it's like throwing a boomerang when you introduce a pandemic. Like it's going to come back to you. But that said, there is some work being done in some high biosecurity labs that probably should cause us some worry. And gain of function research is one example of this. And that's where you take a virus like the coronavirus, say, and you do something like add a spike protein to it just to see what might happen, or just to see if you can come up with some kind of approach that might make it less dangerous. Perhaps you're trying to learn about the original form of the virus. And we might well imagine that this happened in the Wuhan laboratory in China and gave us the COVID pandemic that swept the globe in 2020. Now, that's not the only such lab in the world. In fact, at last count, there were 69 of these labs with a top security rating. So even innocent work poses us danger, essentially. So you might not have to be some Soviet scientist trying to create the most lethal virus ever. You might be a scientist simply looking at augmenting the flu virus in the spirit of scientific inquiry. But if that slips out, and viruses slip out of labs all the time, then globally we have a big problem on our hands.
What's the P doom value you put on that?
Well, I think P doom kind of assumes that we're all wiped out. But the crucial context here is that I actually think a pandemic worse than COVID is highly likely in our lifetimes. It it just seems it just seems inconceivable to me that plenty worse viruses aren't being worked on, and judging on kind of historic record, it seems fairly likely that something's going to slip out at some stage, and that's not even including genuinely malicious viral creations of the kinds that are sort of that terrorist groups might make. There was an attack using sarin, which is a kind of biological agent, I believe, in the Tokyo subway in the 90s, and this was the doomsday cult. So when you have a big population globally with access to cheap gene editing equipment, which is becoming increasingly possible, then you have the ingredients for further pandemics.
Chemical weapons are very similar to that. I mean, they're meant to be banned, chemical weapons, by convention, but that doesn't stop people using them in a time of extremis or war. And it seems to me that, we've progressed so rapidly through the toxicity of what can be released now. When you start off with some simple poison like cyanide, and then it becomes multiplied 100-fold in ricin, and then you've got sarin, which multiplies it 1,000-fold, and then you've got nerve gases today, which are been made so toxic that the smallest amount of them in a large room will kill everybody in it within a matter of seconds. Those kind of substances are in existence, aren't they, today, and who stockpiled, I presume, somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I'm sure that several countries have chemical weapons programs. North Korea is probably one of the chief culprits here, but I think Russia has been accused of using chemical weapons. I'm no expert on chemical weapons because, as far as I know, there's no kind of mooted deployment of chemical weapons in a way that would kind of threaten the existence of humanity itself. But of course, they are a stain on any country that develops them.
Yes, I mean that was one of the reasons for attacking Iraq. Apparently, they were supposed to have chemical weapons available. Didn't prove to have some. What about other catastrophes that we've not mentioned, Tom? What have we missed out in terms of the things we should be looking for in terms of catastrophes?
Well, I have a chapter in the book that rather defies the conventional taxonomy of catastrophic risks, and that chapter is on aging. The logic being, and this is not thinking that's original to me, but if aging started existing tomorrow, then it would be treated as being on a par with every other disaster that you and I have been discussing so far. We're used to it, and so we accept it. But I spoke to kind of many researchers who think it's horrendous that we are all going to die, and they are trying to stave it off and perhaps prevent it. And I'm glad that that work is going on.
For personal reasons.
But I can say uncontroversially, I think that I would quite like it if I could spend longer on this planet with my loved ones. And I think although people feel a little squeamish about life extension, they would probably feel the same if offered the chance.
Why do you link this in with catastrophes, and where's that come from?
Because the premise of the book is things that might kill a lot of us or all of us, and ultimately it's biology that will reliably get every single one of us, even if those phenomena that I write about in the book
So this is
spare
a
us.
built-in catastrophe that will apply to all of us, and no one can avoid it as far as that. So in that sense, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah, so I'd call it it's I invoked earlier this bucket of natural risks, so threats from the natural world, and I would include biological aging and death as a risk. And the only reason that other people don't is that the risk is so high that it's 100%. So it doesn't appear to be a threat. It appears to be a fact of life. But as I say, it is the one that will get all of us, and so I think its inclusion is justified.
You talk about something else called the Future of Humanity Institute. Can you tell me the story about that? Something which came into existence and then went out of existence.
Yes, rather ironically, given that its role was to scan humanity's horizon for incoming risks, and people said that it couldn't even foresee its own fate. But this was an eccentric research institute set up in Oxford in about 2005 by a polymath Swede, and at that time, AI and AI was speculative, but they were doing big picture thinking about the destiny of humanity. And I don't mean 10 to 20 years. I mean maybe even millions of years or beyond.
Well,
And they're also thinking about threats to that future. So man-made pandemics and super intelligent AI, that kind of thing. and they were kind of insulated from the normal demands of academia. There are very few teaching requirements. They had rooms full of whiteboards where they could just goof off and imagine things like music in 6 dimensions. But the university, after I think 19 years, shut it down in slightly mysterious circumstances. And I think it now seems that it was always an awkward fit with the philosophy department. It was funded externally, and its work wasn't really valued by the kind of academics who, who in the Future Humanities Institute's view, were only at Oxford to kind of study Plato over and over and over again, without thinking about anything new. And so, as I say, it was an uneasy fit, and the university eventually pulled the plug.
They probably felt they could have just read H.G. Wells instead. I mean, the Time Machine projects that kind of scenario, the Eloi and the Morlocks at the one level, but then I think they went even further into the future, into millions and millions of years on the Earth, and it was kind of, if I remember correctly, some horrible crustacean-looking creature was all that was left.
Yes, I remember that chapter. Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, all
Dark,
of this is
cold planet.
wildly speculative, and I'm not surprised if an institute was closed down if they were just if you couldn't substantiate or falsify anything which was being produced.
But they were
Maybe
also thinking about they were also pioneering the earliest work in AI safety, much of which has now been taken up by the major AI labs. So I think if you're thinking of it in a kind of purely kind of um, utilitarian way, it would probably meet the bar for continuation. I would also like to defend this idea that academics can do speculative work. I think it's actually very important, and often what seems, or sometimes what seems frivolous, can end up being of some academic interest.
you're talking about a liberal education which doesn't have any necessary payoffs to society.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm in favor of that too. But I think Adam Smith was one first person to promote that idea. I think it was Tony Blair that tried to take it down. He said that we should have education, 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 but only the education which would benefit our gross domestic product, I think is what he had in mind. But that's a different matter. Tell me, are there any governments at the moment who are making any plans for the almost destruction of civilization and what to do in the event of a civilizational collapse or some destruction of it?
Certainly, Western governments make contingency plans. The British government advises us to have 3 days of food and water, that kind of thing.
Three days.
Yes, which is
Yeah.
not very much, you might say, but um,
I've
I
probably got
also
enough beans in my cupboard to keep me going for that long. But not much longer than that, I would think.
no. Well, I think water's the tricky one because you just need so much space. But there
Yeah.
is an organization called the Alliance to Feed the Earth I think in the event of disaster, and their research revolves around the problem of feeding people in a world that maybe has been affected by nuclear winter. So everything's dark, plants won't grow. How do you feed people? And they have worked with at least one government, as far as I'm aware.
Well, I think that we are in a perilous situation as far as supply lines are concerned. If anything did happen to disrupt supply lines, everybody gets their food from Tesco's or Sainsbury's or Asda or the big four supermarkets. And if they just broke down for some reason, whatever reason it may be, if that just stopped, those four, we'd probably have millions and millions of dead within a month because they would starve to death. Just because we have built our society in this kind of inverted pyramid where everything hangs upon very small little things at the bottom, and just a little push might knock it all over.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, and it's all a little precarious.
Surprising how precarious our society is. Um, Coming towards the end of our talk, Tom, can I ask you, are there any global threats which you do worry about? What is the big one, as far as you're personally concerned, that would most worry you about our future?
Oh well, I think all of these are real worries. Um, I think
What's the most
AI is
likely way we're going to end?
what's the most likely way we're going to end? Um,
If
that's I
we,
find hard to say. I think although the kind of super intelligent AI takeover crowds has well, the most recent model of ChatGPT was not the kind of advance that some people kind of hoped for or feared, and the character of the LLMs that we've made so far has not necessarily been that of this kind of um, emergently intelligent creature that seeks to self-preserve at all costs, which is where we might get into trouble. I think in the long term, though, all bets are off. So it depends on the kind of paradigm in which we develop AI and the trajectory of improvements. But I think things are going to be pretty startling by our standards within the next few decades. And so I wouldn't like to make any predictions, good or bad, about what might result from that.
AI is your biggest worry then out of all of those things.
I think so. It touches everything.
Interesting enough, I did ask ChatGPT, what question should I ask you for this interview, knowing that it would have probably more insight than I would have. And it told me to ask you this. What threat are we dangerously underestimating today?
Well,
Why do you think?
it depends who we is, but I think mirror life is one example. And
Explain,
so
explain that.
I'll sign off with by explaining what mirror life is, which is
Yeah.
when you can genetically engineer a virus or bacterium such that its physical structure is, and I'm going to absolutely butcher the biology here, but so that its physical structure is inverted, and that means it's unfamiliar to the immune systems of any animal or human body that, or even to kind of vegetable that encounters it. And so, in theory, you could create a whole new class of viruses, although very simple, are absolutely lethal. And this was kind of withheld from public view until December last year. Um,
Is this real or is it just science
no,
fiction?
this is a technology that doesn't exist yet, but could, in theory, be developed within the decade. This is a serious
So
worry.
the idea is, say, to take a simple cold virus, which our immune system knows how to treat and to deal with, and what, turn it into a mirror image of itself, so that all the various enzymes that we have in our body, all the various P cells, T cells, B cells, whatever they would be, which would normally combat that, are now ineffective. So even the simplest of viruses would kill us. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm not a biologist, but that roughly matches my understanding. Yeah.
My last question, my very, very last question, if you just bear with me, is what if you could give the world one single piece of advice to order to reduce catastrophic risk, what would it be?
I think when people fail in their attempts to address catastrophic risks, so I'm thinking of kind of the degrowther environmentalists, and I'm thinking also of people who kind of campaign against nuclear power stations, that kind of thing. Often they fail because they're not recognizing existing incentive structures. I think you have to recognize the human need that is creating the risk. If you're going to counter it, you have to find some other way of satisfying that need without creating the risk. Some people might disagree with me and say that we should simply shut down all AI development, but I think in most cases that's a good heuristic.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tom O, for your comments on this today. And the book, the Anti-Catastrophe League, is actually a very positive book, isn't it? Because it concentrates also on the people who are working quite hard behind the scenes to prevent these kinds of catastrophes that we've been talking about. Available from all good bookshops, and of course Amazon as well. But thank you very much once again for your time, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.